Hola a todos, buenos días. En estos tiempos de incertidumbre, en donde todos los días nos hacemos preguntas, buscamos respuestas sobre cuándo y cómo podría terminar esta situación. Desde la Fundación Telefónica Movistar se lanzan el foro Repensando el Mañana, un espacio de reflexión, de conversación abierta, de discusión, en donde se le da voz a expertos nacionales e internacionales para que nos den su opinión sobre diversos temas: política, educación, economía, tecnología. La idea es que podamos armar algún indicio de lo que podría ser ese día después de, o esa nueva realidad de la que todos hablan. Yo soy Jorge Toscano, yo soy el gerente de IoT y Big Data de Telefónica Movistar Colombia. Y hoy tenemos la suerte de contar con el doctor Anthony Townsend. El doctor Townsend es un experto investigador en las ciudades del futuro, el rol de las personas y el impacto que tiene la tecnología en ellas. Es PhD en urbanismo y planeación de MIT y tiene un máster en urbanismo en la Universidad de Nueva York. Ha escrito dos libros, el primero en 2013, enfocado en las ciudades inteligentes. El segundo, recientemente publicado, en donde nos da su opinión del lado bueno y el lado malo de la conducción autónoma y la conducción inteligente. Adicionalmente, es el presidente y fundador del Star City Group, en donde es una consultora especialista que apoya precisamente a los gobiernos en la planeación de las ciudades y los distritos innovadores. Entonces, no siendo más, arranquemos con esta conversación. Espero que sea del agrado de todos ustedes. So, hi, Anthony. Welcome, and thank you for being here with us today.
Great to be here.
Okay, Anthony, so I'm going to start with what I think is the most common question during these days, and is how are you doing during this lockdown, and how this has impacted your work and your daily routine?
Well, I've been working not from home, but remotely and on the go for close to 10 years, 15 years. So the adjustment has not been as brutal for me as it has been for many other people. In fact, about 10 years ago, I did an experiment with the New York Architecture League that was called Breakout, where we took the phenomenon of co-working and took it out into the streets. And we're doing co-working out in the streets, working in public Wi-Fi hotspots and parks and plazas. And so, you know, we were trying to explore what it meant when new technologies allowed us to, you know, kind of bring office work, creative office work, like back out into the streets. But I think that's something that a lot of people are experiencing now. So, you know, in many ways, like as I've been studying the future, I've been kind of living in the future, you know, seeing the limits of technology and what it means to be tethered to a screen all the time and kind of getting sick of that. So I've been doing okay. I think, you know, a lot of people are starting to wish for an end to, you know, endless Zoom calls and being stuck in their houses and looking for an outlet. But, you know, fortunately, a lot of parts of the world, people are now able to get out of their homes, get back to some at least outdoor activities, and slowly looking to return to some of the indoor activities.
Yeah, okay. Well, for us, it's more than 100 days now at home, so it's been a little rough, but
yeah.
But well, 100 meetings per day. Okay. Okay, Anthony, we all know you have been working for a long time in this vision of the city of the future. I want to know how much has this vision changed after all these COVID crises?
Well, I think the big change right now is for most of the last 20 or 30 years, we have really been embracing the idea of inevitable total urbanization, that, you know, all of the globalization, connectivity, digitalization, were really driving us towards full, complete urbanization of the planet. That this is kind of an inevitable historical progression of humanity. I think that that's probably still where we're headed, but you know, the threat of this pandemic lasting for quite a long time and potentially rolling into other types of public health crises that are going to slow that process down or potentially even derail it is a real surprise. And it's coming on the heels of political changes to the international system. You know, the U.S. disengaging from a lot of international networks that it used to be the hub of or a big part of, that were contributing to these flows. You know, as recently as 6 months ago, if you looked at the population growth forecast in the United States, the U.S. was expected to add another 100 million people over the next couple decades. Most of that was driven by immigration. I mean, there's a lot driven by natural increase of population, but immigration was a big part of it. That's in question now. And so a lot of these basic demographic trend lines that were driving us towards a world of more cities, more connected cities, seem less certain than they did before. Those could, however, be reversed very quickly if you know, politics changes, if the public health situation changes, and all it would take would be a couple scientific breakthroughs, a couple political reversals. So there's a lot of volatility right now about what had seemed like sort of universal, like laws of urban physics only a few years ago. So at the same time that we had this very new understanding of kind of the basic dynamics of urban growth, we're starting to see just how much power we have as human beings to change those basic laws. And so, you know, I think it's both very scary in the sense that like we don't know what's going to happen. There's a lot of uncertainty, but it's also very empowering in the sense that, you know, we need to be able to control these things if we're going to get a handle on global warming and food production and all these big global problems. So that we are able to some degree to control global urbanization, I think is very reassuring. And technology and science will be a big part of how we do it.
Okay. Maybe related to what you are talking about, we saw that every day the number of people moving from rural areas to the cities is increasing. Obviously, this implies a greater demand of natural resources, as you said, infrastructure, mobility solutions, food, security. So I have two questions in this point of view. The first one is, in general, how can technology help to these challenges? And the second one is, do you think that after all these crises, these migration numbers will continue at the same level?
Yeah, so I mean, technology, I think the basic function of technology right now is really, it's two things. It's creating economic opportunity. So it's allowing businesses and individuals to produce goods and services that actually give people opportunities to earn a livelihood. That is, you know, the basic purpose of cities, to produce and to trade. And that is really what's been driving urbanization. It's why, you know, we've seen the growth of cities not just continue, but surge as more information technology and more telecommunications has come to the forefront in recent decades. Many people thought that would undermine the need for cities, and in fact, it's made cities more effective and productive as trading and production hubs. So, there's a reason why cities thrive when, say, a new mobile communications network is invented, because cities are the most efficient place to build that network out first, and people in cities can take advantage of that communications technology first. And now we're seeing the rollout of 5G in cities throughout the world, because the footprint of 5G is very geographically concentrated. The cell sites only cover a small area. They provide a very high level of service, and they have to be placed one after the other, in a very specific pattern. It's not like you launch one satellite and you cover a whole hemisphere, right? It's like building roads. It's like building, it has to be placed. So that is something that lends itself to so I think in many ways, the new technological aspect of cities is very similar to the old one. And it just builds on the advantages that cities have had. What's really fascinating about particularly the digital aspect of cities is the ability to map and inventory and analyze what's happening in this really excruciating level of detail, and now to predict. And that really helps us, whether we're businesses or governments or NGOs providing relief or whatever, to run cities better and more effectively, and to do more with the same amount of land or money or ambulances or whatever it is. And so if you think of a city like in terms of carrying capacity, how many people per acre or people per dwelling unit, or how many vehicles per road or whatever, that digital technology allows all of that to be more intensively utilized. You can see that very, very clearly if you look at the businesses that have really thrived in cities in the digital age, what people sometimes call the sharing economy, which has nothing to do with sharing really, but it's really about sequencing, okay? But companies like Airbnb and Uber and WeWork are really all about just more intensively utilizing these expensive urban assets and expensive urban space, and cramming more people into the office building, or getting more people into the taxi seats, getting more taxis onto the same amount of road, putting more people who are willing to pay more into apartments. And there's often consequences of those choices that have to be managed. But what it does do is it uses the city more intensively, and that allows cities to continue to grow and to be more productive. So I think all of those things are sort of powering the wheel of urban growth, and we'll sort of continue to allow that to go on. The next thing now that's being woven into that to take advantage of all the data that cities are throwing off is AI, of course. So bringing in what used to be called decision support systems, because they would analyze data and help urban managers or urban planners make decisions, are now actually making some of the decisions. So the decision support is becoming more decision making, or decision delegation. And I think, we're very quickly moving towards a world where we're going to have cities that are running, at least in part, on autopilot, where the managers may be giving control of a lot of the day-to-day work to pieces of very sophisticated software that are constantly watching what's going on and keeping the city humming along at its peak performance.
I understand. Okay. Here in Colombia, we have been analyzing in different sectors or different scenarios, trying to think about how the post-COVID will be. Yeah. But from your point of view, which are those lessons left now that we can use here in LATAM cities for a better planning of the cities?
I mean, I think we don't know what post-COVID even means yet. You know, there's still an open question whether there's ever going to be a vaccine. So whether there ever is a post-COVID is the first question. Does COVID ever actually go away?
Yeah, that's a good point.
We don't know whether there actually is immunity yet or not. So that's another open question. So there's some scary signs. There's also some promising signs that like it is more treatable than we thought. And then there's also signs, you know, that in places that have reopened that cities can adapt and we can live with it and we can manage the public health risk in ways that are a little bit, I think, easier than we thought. So I think all we can say right now is that high risk groups need to be identified and really isolated. That's clear. There's no good way to reconnect them to the rest of the population right now, and probably won't be for a couple of years. And I don't think anyone has an answer for that. There's no easy answers there. So the elderly, people with, you know, immune compromise, they're going to have to be isolated for years, unless there's a really effective vaccine that can be delivered to them immediately. So I don't know what percentage of the population that is, but it's a decent percentage of the population, and that's a major public health priority. The second thing is that I think getting children back to school is turning out to be probably the best thing that countries can do, if they can do it safely, to benefit the rest of society, because they're not only making sure that the kids, you know, are getting education at their most important years. They're putting primarily working parents back to work. It's improving everybody's mental health. Yeah, but it also creates a sense of normalcy. The problem is teachers. Teachers are scared and concerned, and in many cases, rightly so. And the physical infrastructure of schools is in most places not adequate to do it. And I think that there's, even in wealthy countries, there's been, Israel had a return to school that was badly managed and they backed off, and a couple places in Europe have had some missteps. The US is all over the place in how we're doing it. But it's the one, I think New York City right now is like really struggling with how they're going to do it. It's the one thing that we've seen where, and saying that it's all going to be done online is like a formula for inequality. Like the one thing we know is that doing it virtually worsens the inequality problem significantly. So it's one area where technology is the worst possible solution. So it's going to be costly. It's going to require big changes to the physical environment. But it's one where I think, the kids probably are the most flexible and adaptable, and would be able to, maybe try some radical experiments, like outdoor classrooms, or I don't know, So it's an area where I think we need to get more creative, and maybe particularly with the architecture and urbanism side, try some more daring ideas in the way that we've reclaimed, lanes for bicycles, and we have started to take these outdoor dining plazas and things like that. We simply don't have enough classroom space to put all the kids back in school that need to be back in school. We've done it for hospitals, we've done it for restaurants, we've done it for transportation. I think we need to do it for schools as well. I don't know if it's suitable for everywhere in Columbia. In the U.S., it's hard because of the climate, but I imagine you may have a little bit more freedom to do some outdoor classrooms there. It's just going to be something that needs to be pursued, because I think it's the key to unlocking a successful post-COVID recovery.
Yeah, well, in Colombia, I think they haven't speak yet about like an outdoor school classes.
Yeah,
they're right now trying with restaurants and with retail maybe.
Yeah,
yeah. Well, let's see what happens. Okay, so going back a little and focus about technology. You highlight the importance about having like development centers and use analytical solutions, AI, and different new technology advantages in cities ecosystems. Yeah. But how did you imagine this like brain in the middle of the cities of the future?
Oh, I don't know if it's a brain. I think it's lots of little pieces connected together. I think the idea of like a single like control system running a city on its own is really not something that's desirable. That was a vision that a lot of big tech companies put out, in the 2000s. That was one of the things that spurred me to write the first book, Smart Cities, because it was a very self-serving vision for them. IBM really pushed this idea. It was really kind of a mainframe, city as a mainframe kind of vision. And what I thought was more appropriate was more of a city as a web vision, that you could have a smart city that was powered by software, but it would be more like the web. There was lots of pieces of software that were built for specific purposes, but that could talk to each other to achieve bigger goals, using APIs and other kinds of data exchange mechanisms, sharing data openly. And I think that's really the right model. So you asked earlier about tools and models for Latin America. Since then, working with the Inter-American Development Bank and others as well, we produced a guide for cities in Latin America, what we call a big data maturity model, which is really looking at, we did a couple case studies of cities in Latin America, in Brazil, in Argentina. We looked at a couple in Colombia and Chile, trying to understand, essentially like what was the general state of how cities in the region were using big data, and what were the characteristics that they should evaluate themselves on, and then what were the levels of development. So essentially creating a scorecard that they could use to rank themselves. And one of the characteristics was governance. So we wanted them to think about where was software coming from and data, who owned it, how are they sharing it, who was getting paid for it, who was paying for it, and really to understand the power that was involved in data and software in the governance of the city, and not just the efficiencies that it produced or the functions that it performed. And so, I think that particularly in the Latin American region, where you have a history of, say, like utility companies or others like having very strong relationships or having a lot of power, like this is something that really needs to be discussed. And we saw a lot of really encouraging signs, and also like a lot of signs that we need to be vigilant about doubling down on this message and making sure that people understood how important it was. So I think the reality is that cities are big and complex, and these technologies are very complex. So you even look at just something as simple as like a ride-hail dispatching system. It's dozens of pieces of software doing all kinds of complicated things, and talking to each other. And it works better if not all of it is controlled by one person. And it also, it produces better outcomes for the public if not all of it's controlled by one person.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Okay. I read something related about it, that due to the pandemic, all companies' digital transformation has accelerated, and they did in the last 6 months what maybe was planned for the next 6 years, like the journey to the cloud, apps, e-commerce, RPA, well, everything about that. So do you think this we have the same impact for cities specifically, or is just companies?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think a lot of companies are making hasty choices that may not be the right ones in the long term. I mean, because we are still, so to say that they're jumping 5 years or 6 years ahead down their plans. So they're executing a plan that was like for a different world, right? But that's not the world we're moving into. They don't know what world we're moving into. And the reason I question that is because if you look at like Facebook and Twitter, right? Those companies, and even Google, those companies were building, and they spent the last 10 years spending more money than any other companies on earth building the best workplaces, the best headquarters on the planet, bringing people in from all over the world to Silicon Valley, and literally to lock them up inside these buildings. And as soon as this crisis came, they turned around and said, you know what, everyone can work from home forever. And I looked at that and I said, so everything you've been doing for 10 years was that's just, you have one tiny little crisis? Because it is, I mean, in the grand history of the world, it is a tiny crisis. I mean, it's a pandemic, it's a couple of years. It's not the bubonic plague. It's not killing a third of the population. I mean, it's a manageable crisis if you're a global technology company. And they have completely thrown their plan out the window. And I look at that and I say, either they were lying all along, they didn't believe in that plan, or they're panicking. So I just want to question the premise of that a little bit. So I think a lot of companies are panicking. That's premise number one.
Yeah.
Premise number two is that I do not think that governments are doing that. I think governments are also panicking, but they're panicking by essentially shutting everything down, and they're shutting everything down because they have no money, which probably is similar to what companies are doing, but it's a little bit different. A lot of city governments in particular right now are seeing all kinds of tax revenues disappear. They're seeing aid from higher levels of government either getting diverted to the public health spending and other emergency, or they're seeing it removed. They're facing growing expenses for everything, all kinds of relief, emergency, unemployment. So they're on, essentially like a wartime budget now. So they really have very, very little capacity to do anything other than just provide emergency. So one of the things we're seeing is like all kinds of construction, planning, any kind of project that's about the future, basically, is just canceled. And that's really, really worrying, because it means that, you know, if and when COVID does pass, we'll have no capacity to take the next step. You know, we'll essentially be starting from scratch. You know, that may actually provide a nice clean slate to design a new future that's more sustainable or resilient or whatever, with a new set of assumptions. But I think it's probably going to leave us unprepared. In terms of like doing business and software and the technology basis of government, I think it's going to create the conditions for like a real upheaval. So, you know, we're seeing all the ways during this crisis in which many of the ways government works and governance more broadly doesn't work. And there's going to be huge demands for change there. So I don't know how new ways of voting, new ways of making decisions online, I think you're going to see real demand, especially from young people, to bring technology into the way government works in a really forceful way. You know, that we saw like in M15 and Occupy in a grassroots way, but now come in like formally into formal decision making. So I think that's probably where this stuff starts to finally get injected. But that's optimism.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting, Anthony. Well, here in Colombia and in Telefónica, I lead IoT and big data solutions. Mm-hmm. Every day I hear that, okay, technology is just a tool. No matter which technology we are talking about, you will always need a leader to use it in the right way, mm-hmm. with focus and scope. So which are those advices that maybe thinking in smart cities you can tell to our leaders in LATAM cities for a better planning of a smart city and use technology in the way they must?
Well, I think there's a huge information gap right now that city leaders everywhere really need to fill. You know, we have a virus that's spreading. We have people that are carrying it around. I mean, there are basic gaps of information that technology can help us fill. There are basic gaps of service delivery that technology can help us fill. And, you know, I think one of the things that coronavirus has really revealed is how even though we think that we are awash in data, when it comes to a crisis, we actually aren't collecting the data that we really need. And that the city has been instrumented, but it's been instrumented mostly for peacetime and commerce. And that when, you know, we're in times of crisis, and particularly public health crisis, we don't have the information that we need. One of the most interesting smart city experiments or applications that has come out of the COVID crisis has come from the Netherlands, where there's a group of researchers who are analyzing sewage flows in Amsterdam, and they've been able to identify virus fragments in the sewage. And they had been doing this before the outbreak, and they were able to, you know, identify, going back, I believe, into December, they were able to pick up the first fragments of coronavirus in the sewage in Amsterdam that far back. You know, and what that tells you is that it's possible, you know, with foresight, to deploy the infrastructure to monitor public health in a way with just this unprecedented level of clarity. But you have to have the will to do it. You have to have the consent of the people that you're governing, that technology isn't going to be used to monitor specific individuals or groups. It's going to be used to protect everybody, and that you're going to act responsibly, with the information that you have. And that's part of leadership. That's part of having, a strategy of governing effectively with big data and with technology. And I think that's the kind of leadership that will allow cities in Latin America to use this technology and make wise investments with it.
Yeah, of course. Okay, still in smart cities, we spoke a lot about technology. You just told us about leadership, but which is the role of citizens? And this role has changed in the last months. If we can look maybe last year.
Yeah, I think now the role of citizens is really to be watchdogs. So I think in my book, Smart Cities, I wrote a lot about the role of citizens as innovators themselves, as people who would identify problems, that technologists and people in government should look at to solve with technology. But now I think there's so much interest in the tech sector in addressing urban problems. There's a whole new, Smart Cities has evolved into something that's called urban tech now, which we don't even really understand what it is, but it's a hot area of venture capital. So there's a lot of money and interest and excitement in there. Alphabet tried to build this big smart city in Toronto. And the role that citizens played in Toronto was to really take Alphabet's proposals and go over it with a fine-tooth comb and to ask questions about every aspect of it and to find the holes and the flaws and to find, the dirty secrets, I guess, in the plan, and to expose the flaws in the thinking. And I think that's really the proper role for them now as watchdogs, which in many ways is the role that they've always played in grand urban schemes, is to ask questions and to challenge authority, and to eventually become partners in the final agreement, and give permission to whatever goes forward.
Okay, Anthony, and I was leaving my last question just to focus in your last book. I think autonomous driving for us, and I'm talking maybe a little personally, here in Colombia it will be a dream come true, because we have huge cities like Bogota, 9 million people moving around, a lot of cars, and maybe we just have that point of view of everything about the positive way of looking at it. Do you think about after all these COVID crises, we can maybe see an autonomous driving being accelerated also for LATAM cities, because somehow we are still looking at it as maybe something in the far future?
Yeah, I think the point of the book is that autonomous driving is not just about cars, but that's kind of a myth of autonomous driving. And in fact, the non-car forms of autonomous driving are going to arrive more quickly. I spent a great deal of time in the book talking about how the other kinds, we've spent too much time thinking about passenger vehicles as well. And it's actually the delivery vehicles, the vehicles that carry cargo, that are going to arrive more quickly, because they're easier to build and engineer and operate safely. and there's a more compelling business need for them. I wrote all of that before the pandemic arrived. Now that is tenfold, okay? And talk about fast forwarding into the future. I mean, we really fast forwarded 5 to 10 years into the future of e-commerce and delivery and retailing. You know, I think we're in a period right now where, you know, we're going to start seeing prototypes of automated delivery vehicles rolling down streets all over the world in the next 12 to 18 months, because there's just huge amounts of investment rolling in. You know, Colombia could very well become a global center for teleoperation of automated delivery vehicles. KiwiBot, which is a company based in California, has their little conveyor bots, which make small deliveries in a couple of California cities. They're operated from a call center in Bogota, where the operators click little waypoints and the vehicle drives itself between the waypoints. So you know, it's one of the myths, you know, is that we're going to go from a world of totally human-driven to totally computer-driven, when in fact it's going to be all these weird hybrids in between of humans and computers working together to drive. So I think, you know, there's a lot of ways in which this technology will seep into our cities, and a lot of parts of the world are going to benefit in different ways as we, you know, network machine driving and human driving together. But I think, you know, cities are going to benefit tremendously, because it's really about breaking down the automobile and right-sizing the vehicle for the task.
Yeah, well, I hope so. that coming soon. Okay, Anthony, that was all from my side. It was really a good chat. It was really interesting to do this conversation with you and meeting you. Thank you for joining us to this Repensando el Mañana, and well, hope you see you around.
Thank you very much. It's been great.